Okay. Can we start, Lida?
Yes, we will start now.
Okay. So thank you everyone to be here. I just, given that we have a little delay, I would start suddenly. I give the word to Catarina, and then we move to Hugo. Catarina, the stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Stefano. I'm just going to share my screen. Let me know when it's okay.
Okay, we can see it. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So thank you very much for having me here today. Thank you, Stefano, also Hugo and Thiago. It's a pleasure being here with you today. So I'm going to present what is a working paper / argument from my PhD project. And the name is Obligation from the Norm of Reciprocity is an Unconditional Basic Income Permissible. Just a note, I'm a PhD student in political philosophy at Ceps, Center for Ethics, Politics and Society, as some of us here, but just to let you know. So as I was mentioning, this is a working paper and argument. It's really in early stages, so it would be great to have comments and feedback and questions, since the idea is still forming on my mind. And the outline is a bit demanding, but hopefully I won't take too much. Stefano, let me know if I'm taking too much time. So the idea is to start by briefly presenting the objection of reciprocity to an unconditional basic income. And then I'm going to do two things. The first one is arguing for a broader conception of reciprocity, and I'll explain what that is. In part two, I'm going to try to argue that maybe reciprocity is not the best concept to be discussed in the realm of distributive justice. Maybe you should be using redistribution. And then I will conclude and present some future work, which basically are questions and things that I think I need to work a little bit better or more when it concerns UBI and reciprocity. So reciprocity is a well-known objection to the idea of an unconditional basic income. And for now, I'm going to take for granted that most of us already know what a UBI is, so I'm not going to define it. And I think this quote from Stuart White exemplifies very well what reciprocity is all about. So I'm just going to briefly mention it. Quote, where the institutions governing economic life are otherwise sufficiently just, namely in terms of the availability of opportunities for productive participation and the rewards attached to these opportunities, those who claim the generous share of the social product available to them under these institutions have an obligation to make a decent productive contribution, suitably proportioned and fitting to ability and circumstances to the community in return. I term this the fair dues conception of reciprocity, end quote. And this perspective of Stuart White basically is saying that if we are to take advantage or benefit from social surplus, from the benefits that stem from social cooperation, we are to make a fitting and proportional contribution in return, namely an economic contribution like participating in the labor market. And I think this echoes a perspective of reciprocity that might have three characteristics. One, that echoes a perspective where reciprocity is seen as a norm or a mechanism that is crucial for cooperation. And this is something that sociologists have discussed quite a lot, namely Alvin Goldner in the 60s. And it also has two important, I think, normative takes. One is that reciprocity is important to establish relationships, namely relationships of equality. And this is something that Stuart White argues a little bit in the book when he says that the fair dues conception of reciprocity are important for democratic mutual regard and for self-respect. But it also, I think, includes the perspective of how reciprocity should take place. And this is very similar to what Lawrence Becker discusses in his book when he talks about the virtue of reciprocity. And namely is this idea that when we receive or give something, we need to receive in a proportionate and fitting return. So it's idea of reciprocity like when a gift has to be returned in a timely or immediate manner, instead of other ways of reciprocating, which can take longer or can be indirect, for example, and I'm going to discuss some of them briefly in this presentation. So in this case, like Stuart White, but also in Rawls, we can find it, contribution is a prerequisite of justice. And this is a conception of cooperative justice, where because of that, the idea of an unconditional basic income, which is obligations free, so we don't have to do any contribution, is not permissible. And it's one, unfair, because everyone, namely those who are able-bodied, who are able to work, should share the burdens of cooperation if they are sharing the benefits, but it also potential, at least for some, exploitative, namely if an UBI is funded through the taxes on work. So in essence, in this realm of cooperative justice, who receives what, why, and how is defined at least partly, if not totally, by the way we cooperate to produce this social surplus. So the first part of this presentation is going to be for me to provide you, I think, a broader conception of what the norm of reciprocity might be. And for this first part, I'm going to take as a starting point this perspective of cooperative justice. So I'm going to take as a starting point the fact that what is distributed and why is distributive is in part defined by the way and by the prerequisite of cooperation. And I think this broader conception of reciprocity, which should make us think about this prerequisite of cooperation, should include two things. And one is the idea of reciprocity as a relational value. And looking at reciprocity as a relational value is not new. It's done by Stuart White when he says that the reason why reciprocity is important is to establish relationships of equality and of democratic mutual regard, but also argued by Lister when he discusses reciprocity in John Rawls, and also famously by anthropologists like Godelier and Marshall Salins, by sociologists, and even by evolutionary biologists. And what it says is that reciprocity is important for interpersonal relationships. But I would like to argue in a different way from what I think Lister and Stuart White do. And to do that, I think Marshall Salins is very important. Marshall Salins was an anthropologist that wrote Stone Age Economics, where he discusses how reciprocity is mediated by interpersonal relationships. But what he says, namely when looking into tribal societies, is that we have different modes of reciprocating. So we can reciprocate in a balanced, generalized, or negative way. And the way we reciprocate is influenced by the nature of our interpersonal relationships. So in those societies that were governed by kinship groups, but also spatially organized by those groups, the closer kins, namely family and close friends, member of the tribes, were in the center of the village or the tribe. And within those people, the dominant mode of reciprocity was of a generalized manner, meaning that when we gave a gift, we didn't expect a timely nor fitting or nor immediate return. So we could give and expect to receive in a long period of time, or receive from someone else, or not receive at all, at least during our generation. Maybe the generation that will come afterwards will receive. So this is very close to solidarity, or even in a way where it seems that no return happens, although it does take place, but not necessarily in a direct, fitting, proportionate, and immediate manner. Then for those who were socially more distant, either strangers or not so close kins, the mode of reciprocity was of a balanced kind of like what happens in the market economy. When I give something, I expect to receive it immediately in a fitting and proportionate manner. And then finally, for those who are enemies or complete strangers, the ones who are more socially apart from us, we could have negative reciprocity, which is either we receive and we give in the form of a vindictive behavior, for example, or we withdraw cooperation altogether. So what's important here, namely for contemporary societies, obviously, is not that we are organized in close kins, but I do think it gives us two things that are important. One is that we have domains of cooperation that are also influenced by interpersonal relationships. We have domains of cooperation with families, friends, co-workers, neighbors, other citizens. And also within those domains, we have different modes of reciprocity. The way we reciprocate with friends that are very close to us is certainly not the same with the way we might reciprocate with people who are strangers to us, or even with our family. So this is important because it actually influences the way the content of our obligations in a given group is to be enacted or not. And I had an example here of Joanne with two groups, group one, close friends for a long time, and group B, where she has friends that are very recent, so trust is still being built. And we can see how in the first of close friendship, the expectation of return is relaxed because you trust them. Maybe you gave favors in the past, or you have received favors, so you're not so stringent on wanting to receive a return for the favors given, whereas in group B, where you're building a relationship, you're more demanding and you're more concerned to returning favors or being returned for a favor, because you want to build relationships of trust. So this is just to highlight that the demands of reciprocity are quite different in the groups where we are, in the groups where we cooperate, and the dominant modes of reciprocity are also different. The second point is that reciprocity as a mechanism can have several obligations. So the first is that reciprocity is influenced by interpersonal relationships. And this is different from saying that reciprocity is important to establish relationships of equality. What I'm saying is that it's influenced by the sort of interpersonal relationship we have. And in second is that reciprocity can have very different obligations. And I just went to discuss how in pluralism, and namely, for example, in the work of Stuart White, but in liberal egalitarians in general, we can have reciprocity being discussed in at least two ways. The first one, option one, is reciprocity as a mechanism to ensure cohesiveness or agreement with the principles of justice. And this is how Rawls discussed it in political liberalism. Whereas in option two, reciprocity is a commitment to an obligation to contribute productively. And we have this in Rawls, but it's also what I've been discussing in the case of Stuart White in the initial quotes. And they share the fundamental notion of what reciprocity is, a commitment among parties to uphold and abide certain rules or norms, provided others do the same, but they are distinct. Option two is about the content of the norm, is about when I'm cooperating, I have to reciprocate, or when I'm receiving the benefits of cooperation, I have to give back in the form of productive cooperation. This is about the content of the norm, and it's what I think it's called, like Stuart White calls it also, economic reciprocity. Whereas one about the agreement on cooperation, I think it's the norm itself. So one should cooperate by upholding agreed upon standard rules and obligations, for example, obligation of the economic reciprocity, provided others do the same, called the civic reciprocity. And of course, because of it, civic reciprocity is broader than economic reciprocity and can or cannot include economic reciprocity. And it's important to discuss whether we think and we believe civic reciprocity entails economic reciprocity, meaning the obligation to contribute productively, or not. And why
we have 5 minutes left, okay?
Okay, thank you, Stefano. I'm going to try to move faster.
Thank you.
And White believes so. He believes that civic reciprocity demands economic reciprocity because of what I was telling you, because of this idea of democratic mutual regard and mutual respect. But what I believe is that this might not be sufficiently sound because of what I was telling you, because reciprocity, I believe, does not constitute relationships of equality. Rather, it is influenced by the sort of interpersonal relationship that we have. So what I'm arguing is that maybe the reason we think civic reciprocity demands economic reciprocity is because of maybe paternalism, or maybe because of instrumental aspects, namely the need to have something to distribute, as Rawls says in Justice as Fairness. Just going to move into the second part so that I can briefly mention the second argument. The second part of this, now that I've established first that I think we should have a broader conception of reciprocity, is arguing that maybe when we are discussing distributive justice, we should look beyond reciprocity and look at a different concept, and that's the concept of redistribution. And to do that, I looked into Karl Polanyi and his The Great Transformation book, where he discusses the economic systems that existed prior to the market economy. And he discusses reciprocity as today's giving will be recompensed by tomorrow's taking and governed by the model of symmetry, and redistribution as an institutional pattern of centricity, where what happened is that people would produce or would hunt, and then they would give the things they were hunted or they produced into a chiefman or a headman of the tribe, and he would be in charge of storaging and then of redistributing to everyone else. And why do I think it's important? Because it seems to me that when we are talking about mature welfare states and current states, what we actually have is redistribution in a centralized way and not reciprocity. And why? Because we have a centralized authority, obviously with decentralized branches, but a centralized authority, which is endowed with the respective fruits of cooperation, and is then responsible for the allocation of those benefits among members of the political community. So what we have is much closer to what's on my left, So a mechanism centralized of redistribution that ensures that everything that's taxed and that's centralized from the benefits of cooperation is then redistributed for everyone, then a mechanism that is governed by an horizontal more institutional model of gifts and repayments and debts and returns. And this is mainly because reciprocity as an horizontal mechanism and a relational value demands things that are very difficult to have in a centralized nation state unit, namely the existence of interpersonal relationships, namely of trust, past records of cooperation that are known to the people cooperating, and a degree of transparency about what the other is doing, which is very difficult at a nation state level. So now I'm going to come into the close and the conclusions. I think this is important because we have been using reciprocity to justify the mechanisms of distributive justice in philosophy, but also institutionally and politically when we discuss the welfare states and we discuss taxes. But this can have two things. So one, we are instrumentalizing the concept of reciprocity when we should be discussing redistribution. And the second is that we are institutionalizing and discussing a mode of reciprocal obligations of a balanced kind of like the market economy we give and return, instead of talking about either redistribution, which I think would be best, or maybe a mode of reciprocity of a more generalized kind that would actually resemble much more redistribution, which seems to me to be the accurate mechanism governing welfare states. And so what I think is that if my argument that the concept of economic reciprocity is ill-used when discussing distributive justice, then we might relax a little bit more the demands of contribution from individuals. And in that case, if it's the mechanism of redistribution that is sound instead of the one of economic reciprocity, a UBI might be permissible, even if work is an important value in society. So this is, in essence, the conclusions. We discussed how we should consider a broader conception of reciprocity and what the broader conception should entail. I then secondly discuss how we should consider redistribution and not economic reciprocity, to finally say that reciprocity provides a strong objection to UBI, but if we are talking about redistribution, a UBI might be permissible. And this finally simply means that other questions might be posed, namely one, for example, how does the concept of reciprocity at a local level, which I believe can exist, might influences our understanding of redistribution at a centralized level? The second, should we discuss this exploitation objection when we are talking about redistribution? And finally, do we still have an obligation to work when we are talking about redistribution? How can a UBI be fully justified when discussing redistribution versus reciprocity? These are some of the references. Thank you. Thank you, Stefano, for your patience with my time. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Catarina. Let's start the Q&A session. Does anyone have any question? I think no. So let's move on. Let's move on to the next presentation by Thiago Souza. The title is Maricá Citizen Basic Income. Here we go.
Hello, everybody. I will share my screen now. Let me know if it's everything okay.
Yeah, we can see.
Just okay. I think it's good.
Okay.
Perfect. First of all, thank you for having me here. It's an honor to present this work in this conference. As Stefano said, my name is Thiago Souza. I am a master's student in New University of Lisbon. I have been researching UBI for over a year now, and I will start this next month to study the Maricá Citizens Basic Income case. So I'll present kind of an overview of this basic income case to you, and in the end, some of its already preliminary implications. So to present to you a brief summary of this presentation, I will start talking about some introductory notes about the city of Maricá, which is a Brazilian city located in the state of Rio de Janeiro. I will also talk about how the program was created and how it was first implemented. later on its developments throughout the years. I will bring up some coordinated policies that were implemented alongside the basic income program. Later on, I will talk about how these social policies and the basic income acted in the COVID conjuncture of last year and this year. And finally, I will bring up, as I said, some preliminary points of debate that can be already drawn from the Maricá experience. Moving on, talking about the city of Maricá, presenting some important information about the city. As I said, it's located in the Rio de Janeiro state, more or less 1.5 hour drive from the Rio de Janeiro capital city. It is a relatively small city from the Brazilian perspective. Its population was in the census of 2018, 157,000 people, 158 almost. Today, the estimative is that this population grew until 165,000 people, so has grown up a bit. Its GDP from 2018 were almost 27 billion reais, which is the Brazilian currency. In dollars, this would be a bit more than something around $5 billion. Its GDP per capita is in reais also 171,000, and also numbers from 2018. The poverty rate in the city is 4.88%, and this number is from the last census that analyzed the poverty and economic distribution, which was 2010. The numbers from 2020 are still to come out, so this is the latest numbers we have until today. The extreme poverty rate is 1.47%, and the Gini index is 0.49. This is interesting for us to note here because Maricá, even though it's not a wealthy city, it's a wealthier city than inside the Brazilian and the Rio de Janeiro context. It's not so unequal as most of the cities in the Rio de Janeiro states, and it has relatively low poverty and extreme poverty rates. Also, the Gini index, it's above the national average. One really interesting point for us to keep in mind in this basic income study is that this city has discovered recently in the 2000s decades a big oil reserve in Maricá shore, which was hugely responsible for the financing of the basic income policy that started in 2013. Actually, in 2019, 72.3% of the city's revenue came only from oil profits. And finally, just to wrap up this introduction about Maricá, the Workers' Party, which is the main Brazilian party from the left-wing spectrum in politics of Brazil, the Workers' Party has been governing the city since 2009. First with the mayor Washington Kwakwa, which was in office from 2009 until 2015, and introduced the basic income in 2013. And later on, he was succeeded by Fabiano Horta, which is the current mayor, and was responsible for the developments of the program. So now going to the program itself, the basic income. This basic income program of Maricá has its basis in the basic income law, which is a federal law in Brazil that was promulgated in 2004. It was proposed by the former Senator Eduardo Suplicy, which is probably the biggest advocate in Brazilian context for the citizen basic income. This basic income law is also responsible for the creation of several public policies that redistributes wealth, and including the Bolsa Família, which is the most famous Brazilian conditional cash transfer until today. Later on, also before the official creation of the citizen basic income of Maricá, the City Hall of Maricá created a currency and a bank called Mumbuca, which is responsible for the transfer of the basic income. And this Mumbuca is not only the bank, but a digital currency from which the beneficiaries receive their transfer, the cash transfer. And this Mumbuca currency only circulates inside the city of Maricá, as I will develop later on. So therefore, the official creation of Maricá's basic income was December 2nd of 2013. In its beginning, it's paid 85 Mumbucas, which corresponds to 85 reais, the Brazilian currency. So it paid 85 Mumbucas to 14,000 households enrolled in the Brazilian Unified Register of Social Assistance. This is a national register in which Brazilian households are enrolled in order to receive social benefits. And the only gap that they need to fulfill is that they cannot be a part of this register and gain more than 3 minimum wages. So the household need to gain less than 3 minimum wages to be a part of this Brazilian Unified Register. And the other conditionality of the program is that the beneficiaries also need to be residents of Maricá for at least 3 years and to be registered in the city's database. So the two main conditionalities of this basic income program are to be is the households to be inside this gap of 3 minimum wages and to be residents of Maricá for at least 3 years. So some additional info about the genesis of the program. The program is run by the Secretary of Solidary Economy of Maricá that was specially created for the basic income. Shops in Maricá that accept Mumbuca payments are taxed by 2% to convert the Mumbuca currency in reais, which again is the Brazilian official currency. And this taxation finances loans at 0 interests to the city's residents, which was a smart move from the government because it has been helping to flourish the city's individual and small entrepreneurs. And finally, talking about the genesis of the program, as I already said, the currency only circulates within Maricá's limits, which was again a smart move from the government because Maricá suffered historically with an invasion of capital. Since many of its residents work outside the city, either be in close by cities or the Rio de Janeiro capital itself. Much of the money from Maricá citizens was spent outside of Maricá. With this Mumbuca e-currency, now this money is more circulated more inside the city limits and inside the city's commerce. So moving on, throughout the years, the basic income evolved. In 2015, December 15th, specifically, another basic income program was created, paying additional 10 Mumbucas to each household that already received the 85. So we had a total of 95 Mumbucas being paid in total. On July 1st, 2017, both of these basic income programs grew. First, the Mumbuca income went from 85 Mumbucas to 110, and the basic income that was created in 2015 grew from 10 from 20. This might sound a bit confusing, but yeah, there were two different programs that coexisted for a few years. That's when put together, they paid to each household 130 Mumbucas. Finally, in 2019, both of these basic income programs were unified into one single benefit, which is entitled today the citizens' basic income. And these 130 Mumbucas were paid no longer to households, but now to individuals, which increased significantly the money spent in this program. In December of 2019, there was the latest updates in the beneficiaries of the program, and it started reaching 42.5 thousand individuals, which was at the time approximately 27% of the population, which is it represents how big it is, the program today. Now going forward, talking about the coordinated policy that were always also implemented by the governments alongside the citizen basic income. There were made scholarships and saving accounts for public students in order to foment education, financial supports for studies in private higher education institutions, also to promote education in Maricá and within Maricá's residents. Free public transportation was instituted within the city limits, and this might sound maybe not so important, but for me that I'm originally from Rio de Janeiro, I know how it is expensive, even public transportation in the city. So this was a really big achievement for the Maricá citizens and Maricá's government. Also, there was the institution of a broad basic income of 300 mumbucas per month for indigenous residents in Maricá's city. And the government also instituted the so-called Feiras Livres Solidárias and the Hortas Comunitárias, which can be translated loosely as free solidarity fairs, and the communal vegetable garden, which were made through a redistribution of lands, where the government confiscated unproductive lands inside Maricá's limits, and through this redistribution, there was the incentive of individual agriculture and small family agriculture, and so that they could sell their products in the social fairs performed by organized by the government, which was also really important in order to promote individual and small entrepreneurs. Still in the coordinated policies, there was also the creation of the Mumbuco Futuro, which is a program that prepares students in order to give them basis of economics, of solidarity, and of sustainability policies when in schools yet. So from an early age, they learn some basic fundamentals of economics and sustainability, which is quite important in the educational perspective. There has been going on until today the construction of an industrial park and an university campus in order to foment labor and education in the city. And there was the creation of a sovereign wealth fund in 2017, December of 2017, which again is capitalized by oil royalties and has the intention of ensuring the perpetuity of all of these programs, especially the basic income, so that they can be independent of these oil royalty money. Now going on, talking about the COVID pandemic, specifically, since the beginning of the pandemic, the beneficiaries of the basic income received in the months of April, May, and June of 2020, 300 mumbucas instead of the usual 130 mumbucas. The 13th payment was also anticipated to April, which totalized 430 mumbucas at the month of April of 2020. Informal workers were eligible to receive a monthly payments of 145 reais at the time for 3 months, which helped to keep up a small economy and informal workers from being in a precarious situation because due to the pandemic. And this policy reached around 20,000 beneficiaries. There was a distribution of basic food baskets to Maricá's households, which had sittings enrolled in public schools between April and June. And there was also the offer of 20 million reais in interest-free loans for small business. This is also a really relevant series of public policies in Brazilian perspective, because Brazil had a really tough time facing the pandemic, especially from the federal perspective. And Maricá, since it's a wealthier city than the rest and is able to use the money available towards these social policies, they were quite successful in facing the COVID's implications. So now reaching the final of my presentation, just to present some implications and related outcomes of this basic income experience, which I intend to develop more in my studies. First of all, we need to look at it as being a small city case. It is quite an interesting and important case to be studied inside the UBI studies, since it's a program that intends to continue in perpetuity, but it's still a small concentrated case that reaches only 40,000 citizens. It cannot be compared to big programs as the ones performed in a nation or in a big states, as is the one in Alaska. But it's still really important for us to notice, because it's one of the few programs that is going on, not in a temporary basis, but in a perpetual basis, and close to an UBI as it was idealized, even though you have few conditionalities. In the second place, we have the oil funding problematic. That, of course, it is important for us to have these kinds of funding, but we are going down a path in a worldwide perspective towards the green economy. So we need to start thinking about more alternative ways to fund, not only social policies, but specifically UBI. So the wealth fund created by the city's governments was quite of an interesting measure of the governments, so they can be independent from this oil funding. There's also the Mombuca currency, which I would say it's one of the biggest lessons of these experiments, since it was shown to be this Mombuca currency quite successful in this basic income experiments in order to keep the money inside of Maricá and to simplify the cash transfer. We also, another point to analyze is how successful were the coordinated social policies that were created alongside the CBI program, the Citizen Basic Income, which represents a focus not only on the consumer power through the basic income, but also in public services, which might be or might be not looked in a positive way from the UBI Academy. Going forwards, so I would say that this is one of the most interesting topics here to analyze. Now going forward, it's also important to look towards Maricá as an equal country and an equal city case. So this explains the importance to start the basic income experiments in the poorest segments of the city. You cannot start giving to this basic income to the totality of the residents, because this would be unfair if you take in consideration that it is still an unequal city. So we need to start and grow it gradually, as has been going on since the creation. And finally, it's important to point out how the City Hall of Maricá was successful in aligning welfare and economic development. The city has been showing a huge increase in its economic, socioeconomic statistics, and this is being aligned with not only a successful basic income that has been increasing the social levels inside the city, but also with the implementation of several important public policies that work in a symbiotic way with the basic income so far. So reaching the final of my presentation here, I would just like to present you with a small cartoon that I thought it was interesting, that kind of provokes us to think, which problems do we need to face and which measures are we taking to face these problems here, represented by poverty and hunger. and then making us question ourselves, what have we been doing so far, and what are we still to do? So just to end in a kind of a discontracted and provocative way. And now I leave you with my references that help me through this this presentation. Once again, thank you so much for your attention. It was an honor to be here presenting this work to you. And now I open up the presentation for debates. Thank you.
Thank you, Thiago, for this wonderful presentation. Any question? I have a question about the e-currency.
Yes.
Do you believe that it, in a way, could left behind someone that is not prepared to use e-currency? Is something that occurred, that happened, or simply not? Just a curiosity, it's not even a question.
Yeah, no, it's actually a quite important question, because as I said, the program is from 2013, so we have a few few studies towards this basic income. But in few preliminary interviews, we can see that some citizens had a bit of a problem with this e-currency, because it's most of it is digital. They do it via debit cards that they receive and through an app in their cell phones. But also the city hall was really successful in providing help towards the citizens, so they could get their way around the application and the credit card. So even though it's not a perfect, I would say it's going on the right path, because I would say the e-currency is one of the best ways, especially on a small concentrated city case. Yeah, it's not perfect, but I can see that the government is focused on solving these peripheral issues in this basic income experience. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Thiago. This obviously is a trade-off, so you cannot find the perfect solution. I would like to ask another question about economic development. So you say that the program seemed to help the economy of the city. I was wondering if you can see from the data if the entrepreneurs take advantage of the money. In a way, this program is an incentive to spend in the city. Mm-hmm. And I was curious if, for instance, the price of some services is going up due to the program, or I'm completely wrong, and the prices are the same. Just imagine the service you want. You notice that the price is going up or stay stable?
Yeah, again, a really interesting question. This is kind of a hard analysis to make, but is one that I intend to perform in my studies in this basic income specific. I would say that it's difficult to, of course, if you take the Brazilian perspective, since 2013, prices went up. The inflation rates are quite significant, but it's complicated to, especially in the case of Maricá, to attribute this to the basic income, because in Brazil we see this tendency, this trends as in a macro level. Maricás, if you put in perspective with the rest of Brazil, you don't have prices that have come up more than the average. So, I mean, in a preliminary instance, it's hard to be quite specific from this introductory stage of the study. But I would say that the basic income has not made the prices in Maricá go up. What we see are these flourishments of individual entrepreneurs and small business that are strongly helped by this basic income and these coordinated social policies that I brought here in my presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you, Thiago. Yeah, of course, it's extremely hard to find a causal relationship between the two things. So, finger crossed, and
Exactly.
I would like to say you have a great job ahead of you. Good luck. And now let's move to the next presentation and the last presentation by Hugo Rajão, and the title is "Capability to be." I did not pronounce. Maybe I missed
it's okay.
your surname.
Rajão.
Sorry, Rajão. Sorry about that. The title of your presentation is "Capability to put a stone in universal basic income." Show. That's good.
Yeah.
We can see your
Yeah. So, good morning, everyone. I caught a cold. I hope it will not affect the presentation. I guess it's not COVID. I did the test. I will be short because my presentation it's based on the first draft about this relation between capability to be housed and UBI UBI potential to in enhancing the workers' bargaining power. In other words, are the capability to be held can or not affect this potential to enable the workers' bargaining power. I call it capability to be held because I'm a capabilitarian, but you can call it just need to be held or the access to a house. So it is commonly claimed that UBI would enable a greater equality in labor relations by increasing workers' bargaining power. An employer is in a good position to reject the claims of a worker when he has as an alternative the possibility of replacing him with another worker. A very talented worker is in a good position to quit the job in the case of not having his claims attended to if he has other employment proposals. In contrast, a worker whose consequence of refusing a job is losing the associated benefits, being totally deprived, would have little room to refuse that work on the terms as presented to them. So, in other words, the latter will tend to accept such conditions because there is not acceptable alternative. They are facing a scenario in which they either accept the job, submitting themselves to the terms of cooperation they deem to be adverse, or they decline it, and as a consequence, they become entirely deprived of the means they need to sustain themselves. That is, again, they not have any acceptable alternative to refuse that option. So let us imagine that everyone receives a UBI. Let us suppose that the amount will at least cover a threshold of subsistence. The means for subsistence are likely to be among those for the sake of which people are most willing to sacrifice everything else. As such, they are points of potential bargaining vulnerability. Since these are already assured by UBI, the people concerned would have greater power to negotiate the terms of cooperation in their own interest. That is, they now have an acceptable alternative, enable them to say no to the terms of cooperation, as might be proposed to them by their employer or superior. It's okay. It's okay. I will. Sorry for the second slide. So the employer or the superior, if they want to wire or keep the worker, will eventually have to make some concessions like raise the wages, put less pressure on the workers, improve other working conditions, etc. Well, this argument is not new, and okay, okay, it's not new, and you can sum it up as follows. On my left, on a scenario without UBI, people are willing to sacrifice almost anything to secure their basic needs. People depend on the wages from work to meet their basic needs. Complaining about or refusing the working conditions offered to them will put the work position and the wage associated with it at risk. Therefore, people are willing to accept almost any working condition, no matter how bad it is, as long as they think it allows them to meet their basic needs. In contrast, on the right, in the UBI scenario, people again are willing to sacrifice almost anything to secure their basic needs, but UBI amount is enough to meet people's most basic needs. And again, to UBI, people do not depend on the wage from work to meet their basic needs. Therefore, UBI enhances people bargaining power. This is the argument. However, you have to define if the amount of UBI is enough to meet most basic needs, which implies to answer first the question, how is the minimum subsistence threshold defined? How do you define how do we define what the most basic needs are? And getting an agreement on a definition of a subsistence threshold is not easy. However, some basic needs seems less controversial than others, in the sense that they rely more on each person's survival character and less on personal choices, like being well nourished, healthy, warm, and healthy. And I would like to focus on the capability to be healthy. Firstly, it seems to be a highly accepted indicator of poverty. Hardly anyone will classify as non-poor someone who does not have access to housing. But unlike at first sight, unlike other means, which seems to be met with a modest amount of income, like at least in some place, the access through the market to a house is not cheap, and there has been an inflationary trend. It seems relatively cheap to buy some food at a basic level, to buy some clothes at a basic level, to a pill at a basic level. The same does not apply to a house. And of course, I will have to collect more and more data, but with a quick research on the internet, you can in Portuguese media you find some news like that regarding the two main Portuguese cities, Lisbon and Porto. You can see that the average rental price for a two-bedroom house, it's in Lisbon, it's above 1,000 euros per month, and Porto is a little cheaper, but it's above 900 euros per month, while for Portugal minimum wage, I know it's a shame, but it's 665 euros per month. It will be raised a little bit, far from the average rental price. So unless the person has access to housing to other means, housing it in a person through other public policies, the amount of UBI would have to be very high, more than minimum wage, to ensure the capability to be offered. And that's a problem, because you have to rephrase the argument on the right. People are willing to sacrifice almost anything to support their basic needs, but UBI is not enough to meet people's most basic needs. The capability to be asked, remains to be met, and people still depend on wage from work to meet their basic needs, and therefore UBI may not significantly enhance people's bargaining power. There is a possible solution to this problem. Maybe to combine UBI with our housing policies. UBI is not a panacea. I defend that UBI have to be combined with a traditional welfare state. So maybe UBI will have to be combined to some housing policies as well. Okay, but I think this is a key for the UBI experiment. If you want to assess the UBI potential to enhance workers' bargaining power, using a UBI experiment to test this effect, you should maybe compare two groups on which people who receive the UBI have to pay for a rent, and the other group who people already have free access to a house, and compare the groups. What happens when both receive the UBI, which are the different, etc. Thank you. I guess it was too short, but this is the first draft of this idea, and your feedback is welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugo. I avoid to pronounce your surname, so I don't make any mistake.
I want to stop sharing the screen.
Okay. There are any questions on this topic? I was wondering about could you please show again the slide about the average wage and how much the rent is here in Portugal, because I was not aware about the situation, and I was wondering if you compare it with the rest of the Europe, if it's unusual condition, or is the same around Portugal? I'm not sure. Even in Italy, probably the situation is slightly better. Just if you know about, if you have compared this condition with the condition around Europe and around the world.
In Portugal,
because it seemed of course tough. It's not a good situation for Portuguese people, because if you live in a big city where you likely go to find a job, it's hard to find a house where to live. But probably it happened the same city in Europe. I was just wondering if you compare this situation with other big cities in Europe, because it's relevant for your topic.
Of course, the other, of course, I would never collect more data about this, but of course, others in other cities, the rental price is cheaper than Lisbon in Porto, but this inflationary trend has been spreading to other cities, the cities around Porto and Lisbon, and even other cities like Braga, for example. And in the election, in the local elections last month, the policy housing was the major theme discussed in the public debate, because it's a problem in Portugal and in all Europe, I guess.
Yeah, probably you are right. Just wondering, because it's even, as you said, even in Braga, but it can undermine the basic income project. So I was just wondering. You
I don't know. I'm wondering.
Extremely interesting. Your topic is extremely interesting. I think Catarina raised the hand. We have a question.
I did. Yeah, thank you, Stefano. Thank you, Hugo, for the very interesting presentation. I wanted to ask you if you're concerned. So I think it's great that you are connecting the UBI and the capability to work, and also bargaining power with the capability to be housed, especially in Portugal. That's important, but also I've heard of the situation in Greece, which is similar, and I suspect in other places gentrification is causing the same within cities. But I wanted to ask you if you think that connecting both could have a problem in terms of thinking about UBI as subsidizing housing prices, or subsidizing increasing housing prices or decreasing salaries, because that can be a concern. I'm not an expert on why houses are so expensive, but clearly one thing besides the greed of those who have 20 houses in Lisbon and Porto is also probably because the market is internationalized. So we have a lot of Europeans coming who receive much more money, and other Americans and expats and immigrants and others have much more money. And so they're able to buy houses at a higher price than people here. Do you have a concern that a UBI can simply subsidize us to be able to match those prices, but then it's always increasing? So you create a mechanism where things increase instead of being effectively controlled to not increase throughout time?
Thank you for the question, Catarina. I guess the problem is not on UBI. I guess the problem is on the housing market, the rules of market, and the property rules, and the tax rules, and so on. So, but that may undermine the UBI potential, As I said, UBI is not a panacea, but you have to settle the adequate conditions to UBI works properly. It's more that, not. I'm not trying to show a lack of UBI, but a lack of the context in which UBI will be run. So,
Okay, thank you, Hugo. I would like to thank all of you. So Catarina, Thiago, and Hugo, thank you again for your wonderful presentation. And I think we finished because we left 50 minutes. If you have any other questions, just let me know.
I just wanted to make a comment to Hugo. I agree, Hugo. I think maybe what would be interesting now, if you want it, or afterwards, would be cool to understand what kind of policies could be combined with the UBI, for example, to solve this issue of being able to live and have a house at a decent level. So understand so I agree with you, UBI cannot be think in an isolated fashion, but I do think that UBI is important, for example, for the labor market, decommodifying labor, but then you might need other policies like state of employer of last resort or others to help you have options besides having freedom. Maybe for housing, it would be cool to understand whether having a UBI and other policies of rent control or expropriation or other could help. Which kind of policies could help?
yeah, thank you. Yes. I guess the next move is to think about those policies.
Okay, we have another question, a question from the audience. So the question goes like that. Can Hugo explain his assumption about unconditional basic income? Essential housing should either be covered by universal basic services or included in the required amount of unconditional basic income. Is it clear, Hugo, the question? Maybe you can also see it if you want to take a look. Maybe you can also see it on the chat.
Thank you for the question. I guess the two questions are associated. I think the price or the housing price should be covered by UBI at a basic level. But for that, we have to implement all the housing policies to push the housing prices down in order to be covered by the UBI money.
Okay, we have also a comment. I'm going to read it. We have also a comment if you want to say something about it. Basic income covers the average cost of participation in society. If there are special life situations, people can apply for means tested subsidies, the same with extraordinary housing costs in big cities.
I mean, in Portugal, for example, and other European countries, you have at least on housing policy based on means test, but that creates ghettos, create neighborhood neighborhoods for just for poor, and it's not good. I think you should think in the more universal housing policy. I don't know if I respond to the comment.
I think Stefano is
Yeah.
maybe his connection. Yeah. But it will also depend on the comment that I don't know who's saying, but don't you think it will depend? Because I mean, we could have BI could cover the average costs of participation, yes. But what we are saying here is that I think what you were saying is that maybe having extraordinary housing costs in big cities is not permissible or should be controlled, not necessarily with the UBI, but other things, right? Doesn't seem to make sense to have, I think, means tested subsidies to allow people to live in the center of London, in the city, or to live in the center of Lisbon. At least for me, what would be okay is that have a city where people with different incomes are able to live. Those who want to pay €1 million for a house, but also those who can only pay 100,000. No, don't. Yeah. That's what I would say. Thiago, maybe you can ask your question.
Yeah, I was kind of waiting for Stefano, but I think I had issues. Just because, first of all, congratulations, Hugo, for your presentation. And it made me think about, even when Catarina made her question about what's going on in Berlin right now. Because in Berlin, if I'm not mistaken, a few years ago, they started trying to control the rent prices, and now they just expropriated some apartments that they're going to sell in a low price. So, if I'm not mistaken, because I'm not tracking it with much close this experience, but I think that these efforts to control the prices from the government of Berlin was not so effective at first sight, but still I think it is a really interesting case for us to see, because it can help to shed some lights in these other policies that can be implemented with the UBI in order to control the rents and housing prices. So, yeah, even if the measures in Berlin are not being successful, it will still be a lesson, because obviously something needs to be done. We live in this problematic situation concerning these housing prices, and of course it's important for us, even inside the basic income perspective, to think about way out of this problematic. Once again, congratulations for your study. I'm really looking forward for seeing your results, and also Catarina's studies on.
And good luck in Maricá.
Thank you.
You are waiting for Stefano.
I think the session had 10 more minutes. I don't know if we should wait to see if more people have questions and if Stefano goes in or comes in, or. Boy.
Here we go. Sorry, guys, the internet doesn't work here. Could you hear me? Yeah, okay. Sorry about that. I think there is another comment. Maybe you already mentioned it. Vienna has a good social housing policy and practice which keep rent affordable in the city. We have a reply, a comment, Hugo.
Yes, Vienna increases the public ownership of the house, I guess. In Portugal, I don't know if I'm right. I guess that only 2% of the houses are public owned, and the public ownership of the houses has been increased in Vienna. And I would like to to research more the Vienna example and based on the comments. I would like to say one thing to Catarina about the reciprocity. I don't know. Do you know the book, the Gerald Cohen book, Socialism? Why not? Yeah, it talks about the notion of reciprocity. Yeah, he criticized the instrumental value underpinning the conception of reciprocity as we know it, and suggest you shift for another concept of reciprocity.
Yeah, I think you have two aspects. Either you consider, so that's what I tried to do in the presentation, but maybe it was too long and difficult. It's still in my mind, so sometimes it might be difficult to explain. But the point was saying that maybe we need to consider how we are looking at reciprocity only in a market-based way. So we've used to interactions in the market. So we are all used to that things have to be governed by a contract. And when you give, you have to receive. You are already not so used to thinking about you can give and receive afterwards or receive from someone else. Maybe you are used to that in your family or close friends, but not thinking about it in a transaction or a cooperation with people in a country or in a supranational unit like the European Union, for example. But my second point, and I think Carpolani is very important in that, is that maybe even we shouldn't be thinking about reciprocity, because reciprocity implies that I can see what you are doing, Hugo. So if we are cooperating and I give you something, reciprocity would imply that I know if you have given it to someone else, and we are in an instance of indirect reciprocity within a given group, or if you're going to give it to me. It implies a transparency that I think is very difficult to have at a nationwide level. And of course, we have state-led agencies of social security and others who are mandated to understand whether people are cooperating or not. But we don't have an interpersonal relationship with the social security agency or with the state. The state is not an agent, it's an organization. So it seems to me that we have used reciprocity, and that's also the point I didn't mention in the presentation, because it's easier politically to justify it. And also because welfare states were based initially on an idea of contribution. It's much more easier to say, don't worry, you'll pay taxes and you will receive in a timely, fitting and proportional manner, than to say, you will pay taxes and maybe you will receive very little or nothing, because we are in a system of redistribution where when you give, you will receive according to your needs in a particular context. It's much more difficult to justify, but it seems that what we have is much more closer to redistribution than to reciprocity, I think, although that's tougher to justify, I guess.
I think Lida have a question.
No, I just would like to give the compliments to Catarina.
Thank you, Lida.
Okay, great. So thank you for the debate. It has been really interesting. I learned a lot of things that I didn't know before. So thank you, everybody. Let's say if there are no other question, we finished. Thank you, everyone, and again, thank you for your really well done presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Stefano. Thank you,
Stefano.
Lida, also.
Thank you, everybody.
And welcome to Braga.
Thank you, Hugo.